Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, Firsts in Fictions, and The Blood Sword. It's going to start to get long now.
We're going to have that extra half hour just to cover your books now. As you mentioned, I'm Alton Gansky, up in Central California. I'm the author of book-length fiction and nonfiction.
I'm Molly Jo Riley, author of the Unemployment Cookbook, producer of the podcast, and author of the upcoming mystery location novel, NOLA.
And we do want to welcome all of you listening to our Google Hangouts live on air and hanging out in the room and asking us questions. I want to let you know that Molly Jo, we are hoping to keep her through the duration of the cast, but she's under a very thick blanket of smoke, and I wonder if some of our other listeners, regular listeners, may also not be in attendance because some of them have actually been evacuated. And so the big fire down over by where we live, so we're thinking of the families there that are affected by that and the evacuations and stuff. So so our hearts are with them. We're going to continue on. The show must go on, and as it does every week at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which if you can't watch then, you can always watch us on YouTube or aarongansky.com. And the easiest way to get notifications is to add Firsts in Fiction podcast at gmail.com, but that's going to change soon. Apparently Google Hangouts on Air is going away, or at least changing the way that it works. And so we're in the process of doing a little bit of research to figure out what it's going to look like so you guys can connect with us and continue to watch live, but that option should still be there for you. If you are on YouTube, we would ask you to hit that thumbs up button. Helps us out quite a bit. And thanks to those of you who have already done that. Tell a friend and let them know, and watch our old videos as well. So, lastly, we've got a couple new book alerts. Pops, you're still plugging away with Unspoken, and that's been out for almost a month now. Is that right?
Yeah, I had to do. I've republished it, and the reason was. Boy, how do I make this into a short story? When you upload it for the print version, it's usually done in a PDF file. Microsoft has changed the way you export to PDF, Microsoft Word, which I didn't catch, and there's now best for print and best for screen. And I had clicked on, or was automatically clicked on it. That was the default, was best for screen, and the kerning was off on the text, and I thought that. When I first saw it, I thought it was just a problem in the proofing, but it wasn't. It was a problem, so I had to put everything up there. So, but that's all fixed now. That's all fixed now. So that's still going, and probably tomorrow. Actually, I've already done some of the groundwork. We'll be starting the next book in the Harbinger series, tentatively called At Sea.
Ooh, and this is the one that you're writing.
Yeah, right. Remember, there's for those new to the podcast. The Harbinger series is 4 authors. I'm one of the 4, and we have a team of 5 people. One doesn't get a point of view. It's a child, but the other 4 are young adults, and we are each write from one character's point of view. And so each book is done in first person from that character's point of view. So mine is up next. Angie's will be out at the end of the month, called Fairy. And don't think those cute little fairies that run around in the woods in Ireland or something like that. But my character comes up next, and so this will be book. What will this be? 12. This might be book 16 of these novellas. They're all very short books.
Nice.
I don't know if it's 16 or not, but it's 12, 13, 14, something like that.
And you guys have an all-star cast of writers between yourself, Angie Hunt. Frank Peretti was involved for a while, but I think Jeff Gerke took over for him now. And then it was Bill Myers who started the project, I believe, and brought you all on. Is that correct?
Yeah, Frank Peretti did very well with it, but he also had full-length book work to do, and so he had to bow out after he finished. I think he did 3 books. In the series, and then he had to focus on that. So Jeff Gerke has come in with a new character to replace Frank Peretti's character. Yeah, Bill Myers does movies as well as novels and the like, and he wanted to do a series of books that were written by a team of writers, kind of like what you get on television. And so he, in essence, is the showrunner. He's also the first author. He authors the first of each 4 books. But it's his job also to keep us headed for the same goal line. So, and we each bring our own stuff. It's very free form, and sometimes that's a problem. But we get it narrowed down and hammer things out.
It's really exciting, getting a lot of good reviews, and just it's doing well from what I understand, and I mean, you can't go wrong with a cast of writers like that. I love the concept. I'd love to be able to write in team like that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. So maybe one day when I've got 40-something books in print or 50-something books under your belt, maybe then. Maybe when I have enough books where I have to stop announcing them at the beginning of the podcast, that might be good. So
yeah, it's yeah, it's kind of interesting because we self-publish them, and the reason is there are not many publishers who will do novellas, especially when they're being issued about every 8 weeks or so. It just doesn't fit a traditional publishing model. So we knew that from the beginning, but it didn't matter. This was a bit of an experiment that has gone quite well. Well, a traditional publisher has just bought all the books we've done so far.
awesome.
Each 4 books makes a full book, and so they're bound. As soon as I finish mine, there'll also be a bound book that have all 4 stories. And major publisher just bought the first 3, so that was kind of exciting. Just signed the contract on that, so that's for work already done. Like that.
That's very exciting indeed. And Molly Jo has also recently published Crowdfunding Your Way to Success. I do notice that she's just muted her mic. Did I catch you at a bad time, Molly?
No, I obviously have cats at my house, and every so often one of them likes to almost try to interrupt the podcast. So rather than have you hear me shush her off the table, I muted myself. But I'm back now, and the cat is not with me, so I'm good to go.
Nice. And so you recently published Crowdfunding Your Way to Success.
I did.
Still available. Still. So it's pretty. I feel self-explanatory. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about the book?
You know, it was more like kind of a thank you for the people that helped me get my new laptop, because I did a successful GoFundMe campaign based on the recommendation and prayers of a lot of friends that jumped in and helped me out with that. After that, I had several people ask me for what were my tips for running a successful campaign, and I thought, rather than be a successful campaign, why not help your campaign turn you into a success? So for creative people who are looking to jumpstart pre-sales for their books or CDs or music, I kind of leaned it that way, and it's been doing all right on Amazon. I'm pretty pleased with that.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. So, well, we should be moving on to our Ask the Author segment now. And this week we thought we'd do something a little bit different. Pops, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, Aaron. What's happening in your life? Something new, something exciting.
Well, school just started again, so I'm back at work. There's this fire. What else? Am I missing anything?
Yeah, there's something else.
Yeah, when it comes to fires, there's a reason California is referred to as the shake and bake state. There's earthquakes or fires every year. So, but no, I was thinking of something far more literary.
Yes. Yes. Well, I did have a book release yesterday. And I did a book launch for The Bloodsword, the second book in the Hand of Adonai series. Really excited about that. Really excited to see that finally available to the public. So,
well, how many books are going to be in that series?
That's a good question. Somebody asked me that last night at the book launch, and I told them very definitively that there will be more than one and less than 1 million. So. Pretty confident that there will be less than 16, like the Wheel of Time series, or I think they did 14, and so I'll get under that number. But originally planned for 3, that was my goal. But I'm not sure I'll be able to wrap everything up in 3 books, so I might bleed over a little bit. So.
Yay.
Well, you'll remember Jack Kavanaugh. He got his first contract. I think it was for 3 books when he first started writing, and the series I think went 12. They just kept sending contracts to him. So do some more, and so he did. Yeah, he was with that series for a very long time. Okay, so I'm just going to assume there's somebody out there, 1, maybe 2 people, have not read the first book, and the first book is called what?
It's called The Book of Things to Come.
the first book is called.
The Book of Things to Come. That's the
Okay.
first one, yeah.
All right. Not Hand of Adonai?
Well, originally it was Hand of Adonai, The Book of Things to Come, and then it was
I
uh,
see.
it then melded to The Book of Things to Come, a Hand of Adonai novel. And so there was a little bit of a transition there that I went through with my publisher, and so I think this way might be a little bit better, hopefully a little bit easier to search up. So the first one is The Book of Things to Come, a Hand of Adonai novel. This one is The Blood Sword, a Hand of Adonai novel.
Yeah, and for those who want to hunt it down on something like Amazon, the best thing to do is just put Aaron's name in.
Hmm.
Aaron Gansky, Gansky with a Y, and it'll pop up. You can go find that. Okay, now that was the first book. The second book comes out this week, or is already out.
Yeah, it's currently out, and the Kindle version is available free today. So if you got a chance to download that, please do me a favor, download it.
Ooh.
And one of the things is, if you're getting a free book, please be kind enough to post a review, an honest review. You know, don't say it's amazing if it's not amazing for you, and unless you really like me, then you can. But yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I think the Kindle version is free today. I don't know how long it will be free, so you may want to jump on that.
Nice. And what's its title?
So that's called The Blood Sword. The Blood Sword. Each book so far focuses on a particular artifact of great value and power, and so this one is looking at the Blood Sword.
Okay, so really what you have is an ensemble cast, because I've read the first book. I haven't gotten my free Kindle book yet. Um, so you have an ensemble cast in the first book, and my understanding is that's going into the second book, correct? Same
Correct.
group?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the cool things about series is, you know, when you look at something like a Harry Potter series, as the book progresses, you've got the same core group of protagonists, but the cast is always expanding. And so the same is kind of true here. And one of the things I like about it is that the cast does expand, and so we'll see a few new characters popping up in this iteration of the Hand of Adonai series.
And so it's again an ensemble piece, so it's done in third person.
It is third person, technically omniscient. I do it in what I call third person synoptic limited, where it's each scene is from one particular character's point of view. In the first book, there are 3 point of view characters. This one I expand to 4 point of view characters, so we get a new point of view character in this one. Not a
All
new
right.
character; it's just a new point of view character.
And so how would you classify the genre?
This is pretty straightforward YA fiction, easily put into the fantasy category because they are in a fantasy world, but there are some science fiction type elements running through it. It's really what we would call a portal fantasy, and if you're not familiar with the term, it simply means where people from one realm end up in another realm. The best example, I think, is Narnia. So the Chronicles of Narnia, you've got kids who are somehow magically transported into a different world, and so that's kind of what I have here. Except in Narnia, where the kids move from the world that we know into Narnia, we don't see the real world anymore. It's all in Narnia from that point forward until they return. This series kind of goes back and forth, and so you get a continuing thread of the real world with this overlay of this fantasy world that goes along with it. So it's kind of got its feet in 2 different worlds. So I'd probably call it portal fantasy.
Okay, yeah. For those who may not know, I imagine most people do know this. The Narnia Chronicles, written by C.S. Lewis, who was a professor of medieval literature, though he's mostly known for his writings on theology, of all things, because of his radio work in World War II. But the line to which the wardrobe would be the portal, where they end up in Narnia, and then there's other stories that follow that. So, and you mentioned it was a YA fantasy, YA being young adult, so the book is probably a little shorter than, say Stephen King's 850 pages or something.
It's a little under 850, just a tiny bit, maybe 600 pages less, but plus or minus. The second one is longer. So I don't know if each book is going to increase in size, but I feel like it has to. That's kind of the nature of the beast. So
Longer than the first book, not longer than the Stephen King books.
correct. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. No, no, book two is 900 pages. No, it's not 900 pages. It is longer than the first one, though.
So it's what, 250, 300 pages or something?
Roughly, yeah. I
Yeah,
think
around there.
the first one clocked in around 220 by the time it went to print, and this one I probably going to clock in I think around 250. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so is there anything special we can expect from the characters this time around? For those of us that have read the first, without giving anything away.
Yeah,
No spoilers.
without spoilers here, this was a really fun book to write. And originally in my process, I wrote this as a standalone novel, and then it got to be pretty gargantuan, and I had to make the choice of is this a series or is this a single novel? And so I either had to do a lot of chopping or a lot of editing, or I had to do some divvy it up. And so a lot of what takes place in the Blood Sword remains intact from my earliest draft, but things changed dramatically as well from what I had originally done. And so, in talking with some of the people who were on the book launch last night, and thank you to all of you who attended the Facebook book launch, it was a lot of fun, a lot of great conversations. In answering some of the questions that people had about the book, I realized that this one specifically really focuses on how the relationships between the characters change. So obviously there's a lot of that in the first book, but a lot of that is just establishing their relationship, them kind of coming together, and now the characters are maturing, they're growing older. It picks up right after the first one leaves off, so it's not like a lot of time has passed, but because of the nature of the beast and the story, they have to grow, and so there's a lot of growth in the characters here, and I think you'll see that the relationships start to change for better or worse, and that's just a lot of fun. I think this book, and even the book following, it's each iteration the characters grow deeper and deeper, and so that was a lot of fun to watch those characters grow.
And so the third book will be out sometime next year then, huh?
I hope so. Waiting for a contract. So if you are a publisher listening, send me a contract. So yeah, my publisher usually is pretty good about a year turnaround from contract to publication, and so my hope is that if not next year, maybe the following year. So we'll see. I've got some proposals out there. But.
Nice.
All right. For those of you watching the video, you see me messing here. I use LED lights when I do video, and I'm having problems with them. They're fading on me, which may be to the advantage of those watching the video. It won't affect you who are on the audio, but it is kind of messing things up over here for me. So if you see me messing around with stuff, just ignore it.
I thought you were just studying to be Perry Mason or somebody in an interrogation room.
No, my other lights are just, I use these little lights, and they're battery powered, and when the batteries go, they go. So, and I didn't bother to check them before I started, so.
You could have easily just said you were researching your next detective mystery, and we would have believed you.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't.
On the plus side, you do have a bit of an angelic halo on the upper right of your screen, so
yeah,
everyone recognizes you for the angel that you are. So
I'll stay in the darkness because my deeds are evil or something.
Oh goodness!
I'll do that, I guess. And I was excuse me, choked myself up. I was guesting on another podcast. It was about podcasting of all things, and it's. A lot of people watch it, and I was excited to be there. And just as we got started, all my lights went out, and people came banging on the door. And well, this is just horrible. Anyway, really excited about that release, Aaron, and so I'm looking forward to getting my book, and it's free today, which isn't going to help those who are watching on YouTube, I don't think. But check it out. Who knows? Might be free on Kindle during that time, but otherwise you'll want to pick that book up. I am not a fantasy reader, but I read the book, the first in the series, and I thought, well, he's my son, I have to read it, and I loved it. I got into it very quickly and read through it very quickly. I enjoyed it immensely. So I learned some new things about what I like and stuff. So while we're talking about that, though, we need to move on into our settings. And in your book, you did some settings. You've got this portal world that your characters go through, and you set the place is from our perspective almost medieval. So, but what about, and notice this transition here, this segue here, setting of circumstances in the book, which is what we're talking about today. So did you struggle with that?
I don't know. I mean, the circumstances here are the kids waking up inside their fantasy world. Like that's the circumstances, but there are other circumstances as well. So, and when we talk about setting, you've heard me say like the last 2 weeks, if you've been watching us or listening to us, that the setting is the time, the place, and the circumstances of your situation. And so I did some world building. I created this fantasy world called Alruja. I had the fictional town of North Chester, Minnesota. Did some world building for that. And so that's the place. The time I knew was going to be modern America, or rather contemporary America for North Chester, and then kind of a medieval more setting for Alruja. And then the circumstances. And I don't know that I necessarily did this deliberately, but instinctively I knew that there had to be some sort of conflict, some sort of circumstances. Something had to be going on, not just in the real world, but also in the portal world. So I had to think about circumstances twice. And so in the first book, what you'll see is the circumstances in the real world is that the characters are uncomfortable in their school. They're not happy. They're kind of outcasts. When they get pulled into this fantasy world, of course they want to find their way back home, but now they're in the middle of political tension with them at the center. And so they've got to find a way to navigate political waters, but also the immediate physical danger that they're in. And so I tried not to spend too much time on the politics, but it's the politics that send them on their adventure. And that's one thing that I really had to work on, is the circumstances that develop around our characters and the circumstances that develop because of the actions of the character as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So those who might be tuning into the podcast for the first time, we've been covering setting. We've talked about the setting in your book of time and of place. And what Aaron's leading us into now is that it's more than just time and place, and that's usually what we think of when we think about setting. Where does the action happen, and when does it happen? But you're saying that there needs to be a third dimension to this, a third facet to this, that the circumstances will set up much of the action, and that is circumstances that are not necessarily part of the story. Is that right?
Correct. A lot of what happens in the Book of Things to Come and a lot of popular novels that you like happen behind the scenes. You don't see them developing, and so, but you see the ripple effects of them. And the circumstances often come directly from this idea of time and place. Once you have your time and place figured out, then the circumstances are probably going to be there if you're thinking on a larger scale. So, for example, if I were to set my story in 1863 in Athens, Georgia, we're probably going to be dealing with the Civil War, right? Or December 1773 in Boston, Massachusetts, I'm probably going to be talking about the
Boston Tea Party.
You got it.
Little known fact that no tea was consumed at the Boston Tea Party.
That's not so little known.
Well,
okay, all right.
They ran out of sugar, and milk. So, but September 11th in New York, or September 11th in Washington D.C. I had the opportunity to talk to somebody whose husband worked at the Pentagon and was there on September 11th. And we tend to think of the World Trade Centers with September 11th in New York, but I mean, Washington was just in as much shock and terror and fear as New York. And the destruction in New York was a little more widespread, but doesn't minimize what happened in Washington D.C. And so just that date, September 11th, 2001. If you set your story on September 12th, 2001, there are still going to be ramifications of that. It was a very different world. We went to bed on September 10th in one world, and we woke up on September 12th in a very different world. And that day is kind of a linchpin. There's a lot of literature and novels and stories and movies that have been made about the actual day, but I think it would be interesting to look at the day after, and what the people went through following that. And so the circumstances are still the terrorist attacks, but the terrorist attacks themselves never actually appear on the page. It just informs everything else that's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're looking more, I would guess, at the reaction to the event than the action of the event. And that makes a great backdrop of setting. So if you're in New York or Washington, D.C., that's a great physical place if you're going to be using that date. And so you set it in time, and then you set it in place. But you can have a story that's very independent of that. I mean, what does a 6-year-old think on September 12th? What does a 22-year-old think on September 12th, and so on? And so you can get your story. It gives color, it gives backdrop to the story, but an emotional backdrop, not just location, which is important in setting. But when we're talking about circumstances, it gives a backdrop to the story because these people are going to be different, and they are different. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I like how you say that the character might be a 6-year-old child, and then we have to factor in the awareness factor. Is the 6-year-old really aware of what's going on? Probably doesn't understand what's happening, but they're going to know that mommy or daddy's upset. Mm-hmm. And now mom and dad have to explain it to this little 6-year-old, and that's going to be kind of a heartbreaking scene as well.
Right.
And so one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later is that your character should be aware of these circumstances, at least mildly aware. They don't have to be an expert, but they should know about the circumstances. They should feel the weight of the circumstances. And I do want to put a little disclaimer on this. We've talked a lot about these, wars and tragedies and, racial tensions, if we want to think about like the civil rights movement in the South in the 60s and things of that nature. But not everything is so dire of straits. Think of the Roaring '20s when money was fairly easy to come by and people were doing well for themselves and the economy was stable and we were climbing up the world power and all of these things, or the economic boom in California in the 2000s, the Silicon Valley and all that stuff happening. America winning the gold medal in 1980 in the Olympics for hockey. There are plenty of stories about these as well. Triumphs can be just as powerful. And so you want to remember that as well.
We had to get him on as a guest, but a friend of mine, in fact, he's a writer that I discovered, did a book, his first book, and it never really sold. His other books did. He did a series after that, and all of those did very, very well. But Don Brown, and not Dan Brown, that's a different writer, Don Brown, and his story, part of it takes place right before Normandy. And he really covers both theaters of war. So there's also what happened right after Pearl Harbor from those that were on the ships and stuff like that. So, and how that affected them through the story. So the story wasn't all about storming the beaches of Normandy or living through the attack. I wonder if Molly's cats got into something. What do you think? Anyway,
cat attack.
Excuse me. So those work very well, and I do like the fact that you're reminding us it doesn't have to be tragic. It could be something very positive. We were different people after we landed on the moon. People landed on the moon. Okay, so it's 1969, and that changed a lot of things. So you could have Vietnam on one hand, but then you have the great scientific achievement and engineering achievement of going to the moon. So it can be good or bad with that. So take us a little further into this, Aaron. You've made some suggestions about how to include circumstances as a setting in a novel or story. What would be the
Yeah.
first thing you'd tell us?
I'd say make sure that it gets screen time. And it seems weird to use the term screen time when we're talking about writing, but I mean, really, movies are written, aren't they? Television shows are written first before they're shot. And so, if we think of it in those terms, because we're a very visual society, you need to acknowledge the circumstances in some tangible way. And again, you don't have to show the collapse of the World Trade Centers. It can be somebody stepping over the rubble. It doesn't have to be a firefighter rushing into the building. It can simply be somebody watching it on television. One of the things that I remember most, Pops, speaking of screen time, is watching those events unfold with you and with Naomi. We weren't even married at the time. We were just dating. But my wife, Naomi, had just been out to the World Trade Centers in July of 2001. So just 2 months removed. Less than that, 6 weeks removed, and as we were watching them collapse, she was telling us about this guy on the 82nd floor that made the greatest turkey sandwich, and he was excited because his kid had a birthday party coming up, and the shoe shiner who was saving up for his wedding, and she started mentioning all of these names of these people that she had met, all these good, hardworking people, and that's when those numbers at the bottom of the screen that were ticking up, that's when it really kind of hit me. So if I were to describe screen time, it would be kind of in that context where it has an impact on your characters. It's got to be acknowledged. Your character checks their stocks in the morning and they're way up. Your character checks their stocks in the morning and they're way down. Or maybe they're simply hiding a gun under their pillow because political tensions in the country that they live have reached a boiling point, and they don't know what military, if any military, is going to be knocking on their door at night. Or maybe if you think of Captain America, him visiting military recruiters time and time and time again. World War II was going on. That was the circumstances that made Captain America. It took World War II to show the heart that he had. And so I would really encourage you to make sure that you give these circumstances some sort of screen time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because it is setting. Just like you have to go through some steps to make sure we know where we are and when we are to understand the circumstance. It's going to have to be acknowledged some way. And I think there are creative ways of doing that without just telling people in the book what happened, but showing what's left of this or what's going on there, or what the era might be. So, yeah, very, very important. But you're also telling us it doesn't have to be a primary focus.
Yeah, I always worry that in some of these casts that we do, that we put a lot of emphasis on these and make sure you're doing this, make sure you're doing that. And so I have this fear that people are going to go, oh, I haven't been thinking about the circumstances of my novel, and now I'm writing a romance that takes place during the Civil War, and I haven't written enough about the war, so now I'm going to write 28 chapters about the Civil War. Well, no, you're writing a romance first, right? Resist that urge to change the focus to the circumstances. Remember, the circumstances are background. It's the backdrop. If we're talking about plays, this is going to be the background that's been painted or whatnot. It's just informing the actions of your characters. You don't have to show Pearl Harbor being bombed. You just have to show, what comes after it, the high alert that people are on. One of the best examples I can think about this is Fitzgerald and Hemingway, who both wrote about characters coming home from the First World War trying to readjust to normal civilian life. And it was a really weird period of time where you have these very young American men, specifically, who have gone off to war, and war changes someone. And when they come back, they're trying to readjust to normal life, and now it's the Roaring 20s, and everybody's making a little bit of money. So Fitzgerald writes about rich people crying, and Hemingway writes about ex-veterans crying, or I guess not ex-veterans, veterans crying, and because of that profound sense of loss and alienation and isolation. It was hard for them to readjust, and so they tackled that. They didn't write about World War I. I mean, obviously Hemingway has some World War I books, but a lot of what he did was not about that at all. It just informed who their characters were, and all the characters around them as well. So the setting, the circumstances specifically, don't have to be the primary focus. You're not writing about the race riots. You're writing about one man's struggle to find acceptance in the eyes of his peers, or whatever the case may be. I'm sorry, I just had another good example come to mind, and I can't think of it. Remember the Titans. The circumstances is a segregated South desegregating, but the story is about the relationships built among the team and building a championship team. There's a lot of conflict there, right? Is that the primary focus, the civil rights movement? It's a big focus. Is it the primary focus? It's not. The primary focus is the integration and the relationships that are built and the walls that are being torn down. And so something like that, you want to make sure it's not necessarily the primary focus, but it is at least some of the focus. You get a little bit of screen time in there.
And that's one of the great things about fiction, is its ability to touch on society. This is the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. Don't know if you know that. But Star Trek came out 50 years ago. Of course, we're talking about what they now call classic Star Trek. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and the like. But they were constantly in trouble. In fact, one of the reasons the show went off the air is because they were always touching on social issues of some sort. But the social issue itself was never really the story. So they, you mentioned race situations. They did one where there are two aliens on board, and one has, they both have a line down their face, and on one side they're black, and on the other side they're white, and they hate each other. The reason they hate each other is one is black on the right side, and the other is black on the left side.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and the whole purpose of that is to really for Gene Roddenberry and the writers to thumb their nose at racial inequality, and point out how stupid it is. And ultimately, it killed the first Star Trek series, because people don't like to have that stuff pointed out. They kept putting it in the worst and worst time slot until finally they killed it. Then they went on and made movies. So that didn't work out real well for the killing of it. And Rod Serling did that with Twilight Zone. He'd always deny it. He says, no, I'm not talking about anything in society. Well, yeah, 3 out of 4 of the shows have something to do with some societal issue. But that is part of the setting, is not just the place or the time, but what's going on among the people and events like that. All right, so we have this. What is its role in the story? What should this type of setting do?
Well, it really needs to affect your characters in some way, and you got me thinking about Star Trek. Thank you for that. Anytime I think about Star Trek, it makes me happy.
It's a good day, yeah.
And what you say about it, challenging social issues, very, very true. A good friend of mine, he was on the podcast some years ago at this point, Andrew Panabianco, wrote a great essay called the Gestalt, if I could say it, the Gestalt of Star Trek, and talked about how it was so forward-thinking, not only in terms of social issues, but also in technology. And I'm just now starting to understand the impact of that, because they're actually working on warp drives. And I mean, we all have cell phones largely because of Star Trek, the communicators in Star Trek in the 60s. It really inspired a lot of inventors in technology and things of that nature. But the one I'm thinking of now to illustrate the point that your circumstances should affect your character in some way is the great episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where Captain Picard is kidnapped by the Borg, and he's turned into this awful cyborg being with no sense of individuality, and he doesn't know who he is anymore, and he's just a mindless killing drone, etc., etc., etc. Well, you flash forward to the movies after they rescue him, and the movie First Contact, they're battling the Borg. The Borg are trying to, basically take over all of humanity. And Picard has a great moment where he basically just breaks down. And so he's hunting all these Borg and he's killing all these Borg, and somebody calls him out on it and says, "You're not killing the Borg because you have to. You're doing it because you want to. This is not you protecting justice. This is you on a quest for revenge." And they even call him Captain Ahab. And that's kind of the moment where he,
Ooh, ouch.
yeah, and he
I
starts. I
forgot
don't know if you
about that.
remember. I don't know if you remember, Pops. He starts quoting Moby Dick, and it's just this moment where you're like, I mean, it's Patrick Stewart. Dude is phenomenal, and he quotes Moby Dick, and that's kind of the transition moment for his character. What are the circumstances there? The backstory, the fact that he'd been kidnapped by these alien cyborgs and molested into some sort of awful biomechanical being, and now he's trying to prevent that from happening to anybody else, and he's really trying to hunt the white whale. So the circumstances there are not only what the Borg is currently doing, but what the Borg had done in the past. And it was this nice overlay. And so it should affect your characters in some way. They don't have to be at the center of it. They don't have to be. They don't have. As a matter of fact, Private Ryan isn't even Saving Private Ryan isn't even about Private Ryan, right? Like he doesn't have a lot of screen time. It's about Tom Hanks, and the lengths that he goes through to save him. The circumstances there have nothing to do with either character, except that it's put them into a situation that they're both thrown into, and they have to make the best of it. So let your circumstances affect your character in some way. Again, it doesn't have to be the primary focus, but it should have some sort of impact on them. Make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Now, this all sounds kind of easy. Is it really all that easy?
No, I mean you gotta research, especially if you're. I mean, it's easy when in the hand of Adonai because I can make it up, right? But even then, when I make things up, I have to go through and make a very detailed timeline, and I got to get the names of all the characters right, and I got to make sure I'm dotting my I's and crossing my T's and doing all of that. This is what we call research. It's world building. And you've got to world build your real place as well as your fictional place, and you got to do some research. There's a reason I don't write about the Civil War, Pops. You've said it on the show before. The people, they're nuts. The people who love the Civil War, they'll tell you what kind of buttons they're wearing on their shoes because there were no shoelaces then, or whatever the case may be. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to get all
buttons
that
on the
stuff
uniform.
right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mixing up your examples. There was somebody else who buttoned a shoe, but it's important to get those details right if you're writing about it. That's one reason why I say don't make it the primary focus. If it's not the primary focus, then you don't have to do as much research. But if you're writing a Civil War book about Civil War, then count on some hours and some weeks and some months just doing research, and that's going to be an ongoing process even as you write, unless you memorize it all because you're that great of a historian. But you do need to do that research, and you do need to do that world building. So even if it's a fictional place, you should still know what streets go where. You should still know the characters and what they did. In the Hand of Adonai series and the timeline that I produced, I thought about who was in power over the years and that I'm covering, and what they had done, and how the land had changed under their rule, and what political tensions were brewing within the cities during the different times, and all of these things, because that way when my characters come into Al Ruja, they're not coming into a made-up fantasy place. They're coming into a place that's been well thought out, well researched, well built, and I did a lot of research about some of the political tensions and things like that have happened in the past, and why one town might hate the other town, and what that's going to put our characters through. So there's a lot of that kind of going on. It was fun, but you do have to allow some time to do that. So you want to make sure that you can world build and do the research, because you got to do both.
Wow. Good stuff. So, yeah, again, you mentioned the world building, and we talked a little bit about fictional settings as opposed to real settings. If you're using a real setting that is a real, I start to say flesh and blood, but if we're talking about a place, maybe I should say, concrete and asphalt place. Uh, if you're doing that, you're setting it in a real time as opposed to an alternate timeline or something like that. Then, as you build the world around your characters, that's going to be overlaid over the real world setting. So, if you're writing a story about somebody who, let's go back to the 9/11 thing, was out of the city at the time of the attack, but now has to go back. All right, he's going to go back, and maybe he's going to go to a fictional street in New York and to a fictional apartment building, and he has a fictional job and that sort of thing. With that, nonetheless, all of that is set against a backdrop of something real that has happened that the readers can relate to. So there's any number of ways to build the world. There's no right way or wrong way. There's just ways of making sure the reader feels what's going on, not just sees, not just knows. You can say 9/11, everybody will remember it, but to experience it, then that's the writer's job. Mm-hmm. And how some are affected, how some maybe pretend that it never happened, while others are crushed beyond all repair. You're going to encounter those kinds of situations with that. You got anything else for us there, Aaron?
I do. I got one last thing here. We're kind of running on time, and I know we got some questions to get to. But the last thing I want to say is that circumstances can be personal. They don't have to be these global, national tragedies or things that are changing the shape of the world. They can just be personal, and sometimes the personal circumstances are far more compelling than these worldwide disasters. So a couple examples that I give just from my own writing, because again I can do that off the top of my head. But in the Hand of Adonai series, especially the Book of Things to Come, the Northchester part plays out that these 4 teenagers from one particular school have vanished without a trace, and so the hunt begins and there are no leads. And so that's kind of the circumstances that really kind of helps to build and mold some of the more important characters that will play pretty significant roles later in the series. But it's those circumstances, the disappearance, right? There are more circumstances in Al Ruja, but I'll let you read the book for those. Mm-hmm. Or a loved one is dying, and your hero has to find a way to save them. So that's the bargain. But of course, it fits the mold of a lot of other novels as well. The quest to save somebody who's dying, the message that you have cancer, that kind of a thing, very personal. We just watched Creed because I didn't want to rush it, phenomenal movie. But when some of those scenes start to unfold, those circumstances are all very, very personal, and it's not this big national thing. The passing of an estranged son leads a father on a trail that leads to a dangerous mystery. And so that's Harrison Sawyer. It's a conspiracy novel, but the conspiracy is less of the circumstances. It has more to do with the son's death and the father's quest to rediscover his son that he's lost contact with for 15 plus years. So that's really what drives it. The personal circumstances, that's what keeps the character moving forward, even though everything else, a smart man would get out of it. And so think about what personal circumstances are affecting your character at this particular place, at this particular time. And that's going to be the heart of character, and that's going to be where you can really develop some of those characters into some very memorable, very sympathetic types of characters. So that's what I got.
All righty. Good stuff. So as we've talked about setting, then we've talked about over the last few weeks setting as in a place, setting as in time, and now setting as in circumstance, which is sort of the template, the backdrop, which some of this action and emotions take place, in which the characters have to deal not only with what they're going through, but there's the light of the scene is going to be colored by some kind of event, whether big or small. if it's a small town football game, but it's in one of those towns where football is everything, high school football. Um, a sudden loss for a team that hasn't lost in the last 30 or 40 games is a big deal. It's not going to be a big deal anyplace else. It's just a big deal there. So it doesn't have to be global, but it just has to be important to the characters somehow.
Well said. Yeah, I think there was a movie made about that high school. I can't remember. Is it Modern Day that had that win streak for decades? It seems like, and then they lost their first game, and kind of the rebuilding after that. It was a pretty fascinating movie. But you said it well. I mean, it's a football game, but to those kids in that town, that's everything. To those adults in that town, that's everything. They like high school football more than they like their college. And they like their college more than they like their pros, and they like their pros quite a bit. Texas is a football place, so football state. Yeah, very well said. Let's get to questions here before we go. And I don't know if you saw it or not, but somebody posted on our YouTube, so I'll field that question real quick. Pops, it's one for you, and it came through on my phone before we get to the ones in the room. But oh my goodness, where did it go?
And this came over the YouTube, you say?
Yeah, Jacob Johnson. Yeah, Jacob. I'm checking my phone. That's why I'm looking down. Jacob Johnson asks, "How does working with multiple authors work?" So, Pops, I think what he's referring to here is when you were talking about the Harbinger series at the beginning. So, just I don't know if you've got a quick minute to explain kind of how you guys work that.
And what's his name?
Jacob Johnson.
Jacob. Fortunately, all of us, the four writers involved in this, have written a lot of books. I think Angie Hunt has written over 100 books, and I don't know how many Bill Myers, and then Frank Peretti, and then Jeff Gerke now. He wrote several novels and became an editor and a publisher, and then is back to the writing again. But that, for the most part, it's good. We all like each other, but it's always a challenge too, because sometimes what happens in, say, book 3 affects me in book 4, and if it's something that's dangling, then I have to deal with it. And since I didn't introduce it, I may have no idea what was intended. I can always talk to the author and say, what do you want to do with that? So, it has its challenges. It's nothing negative, but it's. You ever watch jugglers? Like two jugglers working together, and they throw the pens back and forth. Yeah, this is 4 jugglers, and of course everybody has an opinion about things, or maybe a suggestion or two about something. The good news here is Bill Myers, our illustrious leader, will always come back and say, don't worry about it, just have fun. And so we've been left really on our own, except we have to drive to a point as we get towards the end of the series. So there's some things we're going to have to start putting in. There's some things I'm going to have to put in my book. Before it was more like X-Files, with a team of 4 fairly young people, college age, or a little after college age. So that's how it works, and the way it's working for us, just very quickly, is we each write our own book. It is a novella, so it's not as long. It's going to be about 100 pages. The goal is to make it readable within 1 or 2 sittings, and lead somehow to the next book. When that person, like Angie Hunt, has just finished hers, she sent it to all of us, and we got to go over it. I do a little editing on it. I'm not an expert copy editor. Trust me on that. But I edit whatever I see, bring up a few things. Bill does mostly content stuff, and that's what we do. Is we share it, and they'll come back and say, I need to fix this or this, and then we go from there. Or they'll raise questions. So Bill raised quite a few questions with Angie on this one. And that just happens. We do that. I did that with Bill on a few things, Bill Myers. So we try to serve as a safety net for one another. And early on, it was an experiment. So, we were trying new things out, and kind of have it down now, I think.
Well, after, 16 books, I think you would have a system.
Yeah, I said 16. I'm thinking it's, they've done it 4, so we've done 12. I believe. I'd have to look. Maybe it's just 12 done now. No, we've done 4. No, it's got to be about 16. I take that back.
Hmm.
because the publisher bought the first 3 compilations, and that would be 12.
Well,
So
there
that
you
means
go.
we've been writing past that. So I think mine is going to be number 16.
Excellent.
So
Exciting.
this is why I don't balance the checkbook, because 16 is the number 16 is stretching me as it is. So
Really. I don't math, it's just numbers. Do we have any questions from the room, Molly?
Let me see. Couple of comments from the very beginning. Dave Fessenden said that Word's PDFs stink. Use Open Office. That's his recommendation. And he said he got the Blood Sword on Kindle, as did I.
Yay!
Yay!
let me just jump in real quick for those who may not know what OpenOffice is. It's a free office software, uh, and you can get it. Oddly enough, free.
OpenOffice.org. Yeah,
Yeah,
OpenOffice.org.
yeah, and
Nice.
it's good enough for any kind of writing you're going to do. And same thing with spreadsheets and the like. It's really very good, especially for being free.
Good to know. Tess joined us late. I wouldn't normally say this, but she had dental work this afternoon,
Ooh.
so it's not related to the podcast, but we can all feel her pain, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
Wait, are you saying her dental work isn't tied to the podcast?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Continuing on, Dave Fessenden said he just downloaded another Kindle freebie, which is Imagination at Work by Alton Gansky. So there are 2 Gansky Kindle books available today. Pretty exciting.
Well, that one's been around a long time, and I set it for free. It's really a compilation of blog posts dealing with creativity.
Nice. Looks like fun. And then Tess says, in most children's and YA stories, often the circumstance would be the absence of parents, either by death, occupation, or lack of interest. If you don't have that circumstance, the young main characters would have a difficulty having their adventure with a nearby attentive parent. And Dave says that the parents and guardians are often another conflict element, such as Peter Parker, Spider-Man, with Aunt May. He says Tim Shoemaker has the kids in his preteen thriller novels with very good parents, and when the kids get into trouble, they keep things from the parents, but finally tell them about it, and the parents help solve the problems. But he didn't say what ones those were, what book series those are. So Dave, if you're still there, what novel series is that? We were talking about just comments on Star Trek. Yes, Patrick Stewart did later play Captain Ahab in a TV movie of Moby Dick. That was interesting. And Tess says in 16 Candles, the movie, it's the plot of a girl looking forward to her 16th birthday, but the circumstance is that it is also her sister's wedding, which causes everyone to forget her birthday. So that would again be proving her point of the inattentive family or parents.
Yeah, it seems that seems legitimate. So, and I don't know that it's necessarily just the absence of parents. I think that's part of the conflict, but it may be parents leaving or parents splitting up or moving to a new house or moving to a foster home or something like that. That's often the circumstances. Being abducted by a big friendly giant, perhaps. Those types of things. So, yeah, it can be, especially if the parents exit. Ronald Dahl does this. No, I'm sorry, it's not Ronald. I keep wanting to call him Ronald.
There's no N. It's rolled.
Rolled Dahl.
Yes.
Okay. It's been a while since I've read a kid's book. He does it in a lot of his books where the parents die, and then the kids are shipped off to these ants where magical, these weird, crazy ants, and then magical things happen.
Mhm.
So the death of the parents absolutely is part of the circumstances there, for sure. So excellent. Well, great. We got some good interaction. Thanks to all of you who were listening, and to those of you who listened later on YouTube. Thank you to you as well. Don't forget, next week we're going to be handling the first of 2 wildcard episodes in a row. It could be anything. We don't know. I'm not just saying that to get you excited. I'm saying we don't know. We genuinely we don't know what it's going to be, but we will know by next Wednesday. So stay tuned. We're going to try and get you more information about when we eventually switch over to YouTube Live, so that you guys will not miss invitations for that. Don't forget to ask the author. We'll be posting on Facebook and Twitter probably pretty soon. If you have any questions for any of us or just questions about writing in general, send those to us and we'll get those answered for you as quick as we can. You can find us at altongansky.com, frankly-mydearmojo.com, and aarongansky.com. You can also find us in Bakersfield, at least 2/3 of us in Bakersfield this Saturday on August 20th. Molly Jo is going to be presenting her I don't want to say lesson, her presentation on growing your social media swarm. We'll be up with the writers of Kern. I'll be there with her. We'll both be selling books. It'll be a lot of fun. So if you can join us, we'd love to see you out there. That's about it. So we thank you all for listening. And until next week, good writing.